Water is the lifeblood of California, really for all forms of life. And so we need healthy water systems. Climate change is fundamentally disrupting our water systems. The dry periods are going to become drier, the wet periods are going to become wetter and more severe. And so we need to understand how to maintain the resiliency of our systems.
The amount of water that Northern California and Southern California get from the very northern part of the state near Siskiyou County is really important. Large volumes of water. And a lot of that is derived from snowmelt, but a lot of it is actually generated from groundwater, from these springs. These are places like the McCloud and Hat Creek, Rising River. These are rare, and we think they are ecologically very important.
One of our goals at CalTrout is to steward source water areas. We recognized the importance of the Mount Shasta regional springs and put together a team of scientists to study and better understand these systems. There's a lot that we did not know about the springs in this region. How much water are they really producing? How vulnerable are they to drought cycles and climate change? These springs are important for the blue ribbon trout fisheries that we have in this watershed, for recreation, for clean drinking water, and are also spiritually important to the people who have lived here since time immemorial. The Pit River Tribe and the Winnemem Wintu have long recognized and understood the importance of these source waters.
We use water culturally, we use it spiritually in ceremony, but also use it to recreate. I try to take my children to these water bodies of significance, to some springs of significance. These are places that we consider as sacred sites, as holy sites with purposes, and the same thing with the spring systems as well.
This CalTrout project is really important to building our scientific understanding that can then shape and inform how we manage the system and ultimately protect it so that it continues to benefit people and nature in decades to come.
We're here at Burney Creek, in the Burney Creek watershed. We're a little upstream of Burney Falls, and then after Burney Falls, the water flows into the Pit River, which feeds into Lake Shasta. It's one of the three major tributaries to the Sacramento River, which is a really important resource for the state of California. Our role is to collect water samples from various springs in the area. We bring them back to our lab, and we analyze them for a variety of isotopic tracers like deuterium, oxygen-18, and tritium. And these tracers tell us how high up the mountain the water originated as snow, and they also tell us how old the water is.
One thing about groundwater is it has a time lag to it. The groundwater that's issuing right here entered the system a couple of decades ago. A slow system in old age, in general, that's a less vulnerable, more resilient system.
Snowpack melts more slowly, which allows it to infiltrate into the ground and then eventually makes its way out as cold, clean spring water. When you have rainfall on a surface, more of it will run off of the surface instead of percolating down into the ground.
The physical scientists in the group are answering really important questions that I always get in my talks. I like to talk about these spring-fed systems being really important for the future because they provide this buffer. What we don't know is how long does that water take to travel to the springs? What buffer are we actually talking about?
One of the more interesting geochemical tracers we use to determine groundwater age is a thing called tritium. Tritium is an unstable isotope of hydrogen that formed in large quantities in the atmosphere during the peak of atomic weapons testing in the 1950s and 1960s. It found its way into precipitation in the form of rain and snow. When precipitation that has tritium in it enters the ground, it stops interacting with the atmosphere and it carries that chemical signature with it. So we can use that chemical signature to figure out how old that water is when it fell as rain or snow.
The springs in this area are a critical habitat for fish species. They have a very stable flow, and the water that comes out of these springs is very cold. And that's critical for the fish to be able to go through their life cycles.
For us, we're really interested in the fish and the ecology of these systems, which are somewhat unknown, I would say. I mean, I've studied these systems for the last 15 years, and so I was really excited to partner with CalTrout in Otolith, Livermore, and Cal State East Bay to get at some really hard questions. We're interested in these differences in life history between Omicus, rainbow trout, and these runoff precipitation-derived streams and the spring-fed systems. How quickly do these fish grow in each of these respective systems? And then we can also look at the spawn timing of these fish. Do they spawn at the same time, or is there variability based on where you are or what system you're in? And then finally, when they begin to feed naturally in the system, when they switch from maternal yolk to aquatic insects. And what does that mean for climate change and future projections of increases in temperature and changes in runoff flow?
So the work here is physically going down as a river and using backpack electrolyzers to shock fish. And it doesn't kill them, it just stuns them. And then we scoop them up with nets and we weigh and measure them. And we actually sacrifice a portion of those fish and we take out these tiny ear bones called otoliths. And the neat thing about the otoliths is it's like rings on a tree. So you can count how old the fish is, and we can also get information on where that fish has traveled by looking at the chemistry in the otolith. And even the width of those rings can tell us how well it is growing in certain environments. So it's kind of like a little data logger inside the fish's head.
Otoliths put on daily increments. So as a fish grows, those increments get wider if it's growing fast or narrower. And so really interesting to look at tying temperature and food back to the growth rates that we see in these fish and to get an idea of their life history diversity between the habitats. And we're beginning to see some really cool results. We're seeing strong differences in spawn timing between runoff fish and spring-fed rivers. We're seeing strong differences in when they begin to exogenously feed on those insects when they're moving off yolk. And then we're seeing strong differences in the growth of these fish between these habitats as well. And those differences are really important ultimately for the life history diversity and to conserve these fish for the future. If we have everything that is the same, if something comes along, some sort of big environmental event, a flood, a fire, disease, that a lot of our fish will be reduced because we don't have the diversity to withstand. And so if we can conserve that diversity, I think we'll be in better shape.
The information that we have gathered is crucial to the future understanding of the vulnerability and resilience of these springs and their importance for wild trout habitat. Because of the analyses that the team has done, we have found that the primary range where the spring water falls as snow is between 10,000 feet elevation and 6,500 feet elevation. This is a very important recharge zone for these springs.
As the atmosphere warms, the snowpack is gonna slowly disappear and we're gonna get more rain instead of snow. We're finding that the water is typically between 5 and 50 years old, which means that there's a little bit of a buffer, but any changes that happen now will propagate through the system within our lifetime.
Understanding these systems, especially under the threat of climate change, is important to try to preserve them, to see how long we might get before things really shift in terms of climate, how you might manage the resources while we have a little time.
By discovering more about the environment around us, we can help decision makers make better decisions to prepare us for changes that come in the future.
Us being river people, our history and our subsistence lifestyles and existence was dependent on these tributaries and river systems. We understand the value of great water quality, and what it brings and what it sustains.
At the end of the day, most Californians, most Americans don't know where their water comes from. They don't know that protecting our watersheds and improving and maintaining the environmental health of our rivers is really important to the water that comes out of our taps. People and nature thrive together. Healthy rivers mean healthy people.